Okay, so the session is recording now. Okay, so basically, I'm just going to finish this off. So this is the paper we're doing during my tutorial on Monday, but we didn't get to this part. So instead of starting a new paper today and probably not finishing it, I think it's best to just do some revision on this DLL stuff, and hopefully, that will help you. Okay, so yeah, so let's look at the question. So your software is extensible through a series of DLL-based plugins. Not all plugins work with the current version of the software. Each plugin implements a C function called validate, um, which takes an integer parameter representing the current version of the software. So this function takes an int that represents the current version of the software, and then it returns a Boolean indicating if it is compatible with the software or not. And then so what you need to do is provide code for a function which takes in a DLL, a vector of DLL file names, as well as an integer version number as input, and then it must then loop through all of the specified files, and then attempt to extract and run the validate function from each one, and then return true only if all of the plugins are compatible with this version of the software, right? So what we need to do is we basically need to take file names. So those will be DLL file names, and then we need to take an integer version number, and then we just loop through all the DLLs, and then try to extract and run the validate function, which is specified here, and then return true only if all of these plugins are compatible with the software. Okay, so to do this, we can actually like we can show this obviously like through explicit linking. So we create a function in main, and then we simply take in file names. So let me actually open Notepad++. Okay. So what we need to do is the following. So let's say we had a function, so this returns a Boolean. If you feel uncomfortable with DLLs, another tip is to, so like I've given this advice to students also like last year. So what you can do is like when you practice a DLL question, is you can basically like have a look at the file, like the slides themselves, like the file handling slides, and then try to interpret that code like in the context of the question, right? So I'm going to just show you guys that quickly. So even with linked lists, you can actually do this. Even with operator overloading, same idea. So let's say, for example, so for explicit linking, for example, let's say this is what you have. No, implicit linking. Yeah, so let's say this is what you have for explicit linking. So then you need to include the windows.h header file, and then you need to create a function pointer that can point to the particular like function that you want to extract from the DLL, and then you need to do all of the stuff, right? So in our context, right, so what you need to do is that you were asked to create a function. You are asked to create a function that takes a vector of DLL file names, right? So then you create your function. So you can say validate DLLs, and then it takes in a vector of file names, so that will be a string, right? And then so this is your function. And then, so let's say return true. So this would be if all of these DRLs are compatible with a particular version, right? So I think this question also asks you to take in a version, so an integer version, right? So then you would say int version. Check how many practicals you're going to take into consideration. So it's 7 practicals. So your 7 highest practicals. Okay, and then after taking an integer version number, so you need to loop through all the specified files, right? So then you can say, for example, for each string str name in str file names. Then what you could do is then you could create like obviously then what you need to do is, so now we get to the DLL stuff. So then the first thing you would have to do is basically like create an instance. Well, not really like an instance in the form of an object, but like a variable that will point to the actual function, right? So then you would start with that. So in this case, let's say the function pointer. So in this case, the question says, so this function is validated. It takes an int, one int, and then it returns a bool. So then you'd say validate. So in this case, make it a pointer, and then you'd say, let's just call it DLL function, and then it takes an int as a parameter, right? So then here you would just say DLL function, and then just do that. And then after doing that, then what you would do is you would then create a handle. So then age instance, and then you would then take in the file name, right? So then you would say load library, and then you would provide the file name, or name in this case. No. So you do that, but obviously you have to do this. Yeah, right. Another thing you could do if you want, you could just create this outside of the function, and then here just keep updating it. And then, which might not be a good idea, but let's just have a look. And then if you were able to create the handle to the function, then you would then actually extract the function, right? So then if you're able to create the handle to the function, then you can then finally uh, that is what we didn't do. And then you cast this into a DLL function. And then so let's get the address of the function. And then we need to provide the handle as well as the name of the function you're looking for. So this is the handle, and the name is validate. And then after getting that, what we need to do now is we check if we're able to actually, if you know, getting the function and then converting it to this DLL fun pointer worked. So then if that was successful, then we can simply call the function, right? So in that case, remember this takes the version, right? So you need to provide the version. So you need to say if function, right? And then provide the version. So if this returns true, then that's, well, we only need to check if it doesn't return true. If it doesn't return true, we can then, like there's no point in continuing. So we can, or just check, how do you know the question is explicit linking? What is the difference? So the question, okay, so in this case, so if you actually look at the question, so this question is out of 10 marks, and it's asking you to like take in a vector of data file names and then loop through all of them, and then attempt to extract, right? And then run the validate function, right, from each one, right? So this doesn't happen with implicit linking, this right here, right? With implicit linking, basically in main, right, there's no indication that any function that you're running, it means that you are not extracting a function, which is this, extracting the function, and then you are not, so obviously you would run the function, but you wouldn't know that it's a function that's provided through a DLL because that was done through the linking stage, right, of your compilation, right? So in this case, you have to extract the function because the question is asking you to, right? And then you run the validate function, and then check if these are compatible with this version of the software, right? And then if you think about this, this makes sense in the context of 10 marks, because if you didn't have to do all of this work, then it wouldn't make sense for this question to also be out of 10, right? But also, like with regards to this question, this is actually in the question. You have to extract and run the function. So that's how you would know that this is um, explicit linking. All right, so in any case, so there's two ways of doing this. So for example, like if, so for example, if this returns false, then we could, because we want to break from this loop, right? We don't want to continue. So then we could just say, so let me just think about this. Yeah, so then we can just break the loop here and then release the resources later, right? So in order to release the resources, all we need to do is just call the free library, right? So then we can say, for example, after the loop, if handle, right? So if you know, we were able to, you know, load a library at some point, then what we can do is we can say free library, and then we need to provide the handle, right? Because this is the most important step. We need to make sure that we are able to free um, the library, right? But then also, yeah, this is probably not a good approach, because then if we do this, then we would still return true, but we want to return false, right? So then another thing we could do is we could, well, free the library here. And then instead of calling the break, we can just return false here. And then there's nothing else we have to do. Let's just make sure that our use of resources doesn't lead to any resource leaks. So we have our function, we create this pointer, and then create this handle, and then we loop through all the file names, we load the library, we check if that was successful, and then we set this pointer to whatever process address we get, and then or procedure address, and then we basically check if that was successful, and then we call the function, and then if this is not compatible with the version, then we release the resource, and then return false. But then if that's not the case, then this will just not be true, and then we'll just continue with the loop. So we would basically just move on, and then we would load another library, and then if we're done, then we would get to the end of the loop, and then we'd return true, and then everything would still be fine. Okay, so that looks fine. Yeah, that looks okay. Let's just do that. Okay, so that's that. Yeah, so this is, for example, like one way you could approach this, right? So during revision, so you will always have to remember that this, like everything that we're asking you about, right? It is in your lecture slides, right? Also with operator overloading, you have all the, like like the the structure of the operator functions, right? Even with like file handling, you do have the general structure of how, like a function for writing to a binary file, or a function for loading from a binary file, or counting the number of records, or loading stuff from a text file looks, right? You have the structure for all those functions. You just need to try and take that that structure and apply it to the question that you're being asked, right? That's all you have to do. Okay, so in this case, then that's that. And then, yeah. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. So assume that the validation functionality for each plugin is modularized into its own header file. Provide code for the header file for each of these plugins must implement, right? So then there's that as well. And then you can also do that using your lecture notes, right? So you can literally go to here, go to the DLL header file, and then so start with the boilerplate code. So here we have to provide the entire header file, right? Code for the entire header file. So then we need to start like with everything. So if not defined, let's call this DLL header. Yeah, okay. So DLL header h. Then we need to define DLL header h, and then you just put the end if. Yeah, and then after that, the other thing we need to check is the word, like this particular word defined, right? So if defined, this term that would be defined if we're creating a DLL, like in the command line, then we would, for example, do a DLL export. If it's not defined, it means we're doing a DLL import, right? So then we'd have to check for that. So if defined, say this is build, that's usually what we go with, build DLL, then define, so we need to make a special declaration, DLL export, and then else, define DLL import. And then we need to end this. Yeah, and then after doing that, then so let's just double check. So DLL exports and then DLL imports. And then after that, then we need to remove any C++ name mangling. So by putting our function inside of the extern C scope. So then let's do that. And then get our function. And then So that would be build DLL, and then no, we need to provide a marker for here. So DLL function. So basically defining this as a DLL export or a DLL import. And this is what we need to provide here. And validate, and then we need to take an int. Then that should be fine. Okay, and then yeah, okay, and then that's the header file, and then this is your 5 marks. Okay, so nice and simple. Okay, so here's a question. What advice can you give to a person who's not 100% with some concepts? So we don't expect any of you to be, like to know the concepts at 100%, right? And, just to mention this, we certainly do not expect any of you to memorize any of the stuff, right? What you need to do is you need to be familiar with the work in such a way that it becomes intuitive, right? Like you have an intuitive understanding of what's happening, right? And the only way to do that, it's the same as with mathematics. So if you're doing computer science, I'm assuming you're also doing mathematics. If you want, like to all the work to be intuitive, so that whatever kind of problem you get, you are able to address using certain formulas and methods and principles. You need to practice as much as you can. Unfortunately, computer science is that way, so to speak, right? You need to practice. It's like practicing an instrument. Um, like a musical instrument, you have to put in the hours. You have to sit down and just do it, right, until you get it right. And remember, we're always there to answer your questions. We're always happy to help. Yes, so remember, I think some of the VPL exercises are compulsory. You just need to go and check which ones are compulsory. But at the end of the day, we take 7 of like your highest marks. Aren't you missing the vector file names in the header declaration? No. So remember, the vector is for the this function here that we were asked to create in order to validate each DLL against the version, right? But this function that we get from the DLL, the validate, does not take a vector as one of its parameters. Okay, so it only takes an integer. Okay, so it wouldn't work anyway, even if it took a vector, because then that would be a C++ feature, right? And remember, we're trying to make this C-style function, right? So we can't really include things like vectors and strings and so forth. Yeah, so that's that. Am I still going to get, okay, I think I answered that. Has there been confirmation? Okay, so far the exam is open book until further notice. Okay, so DLLs are not the only way to write extensible, modular, flexible software. Many modern systems are built around web services where the module code resides on an internet-based server, executes remotely, and the results are sent back to the calling program. All right, so you learn more about this next year when you do Informatics 2B, and you work with web services a lot when you do your third-year projects. But basically, the idea behind a web service is that it's something that's sitting on another computer, which is called a server, and then you connect to your web service via the internet, and then you can call functions from your web service, and then but the web service will execute whatever you want it to execute in the server, like where it is, right? So it'll execute it remotely, and then the results will just be sent back to you, the calling program, right? So it's similar to it, like a library, right? Actually, it is a library. So that's how it's similar to DLLs, right? Like it allows you to like have like modular software, right, which is also extensible and flexible. So in this case, so the question is asking, based on your experience with DLLs and given this description, provide one reason to choose DLLs over this approach and one reason not to. All right. So actually, so let's see. You need an internet connection. That's an immediate requirement that makes the system rather. Yes, actually, so I see you already provided an answer to this, and that's a good answer. One reason to choose DLLs over web services is that over web services, you need to connect to them through a network. And if you need to do that, then you're opening yourself up to different kinds of vulnerabilities, right? Like, yeah. And then so that's one disadvantage of working with web services, right? But can you guys think of one advantage that using a web service would have over using a DLL? So let's hear it. Okay, so anyway, so I'll provide you guys with one advantage that I can think of from the top of my head. Okay, I'm not sure what information capacity means. You need to elaborate on that. Yeah, so you can expose your web service uh, like on the internet. There's nothing that stops you from doing that. Um, so DLLs are forced to be on the local machine. That is true, right? That's one disadvantage. Remember, some DLLs won't work with all programming languages. That's another um, um, disadvantage of DLLs, right? And then, like some DLLs, for example, can be written specifically for, like certain programming languages and like so forth. So that's one disadvantage. And with web services, that is never a disadvantage because a web service is a program that was already written that is just sitting on someone else's computer, right? That's all that it is. So even if that web service was written in JavaScript, for example, and you are writing a program in C++, if you are able to make like to create a like to make a connection to the web service, and then you are able to call a function from the web service, like make a request, then um, like that's all you need to do, right? Like you don't even have to worry like about like the language that was used to create the web service, or like any kinds of specification or anything like that. Like a prime example of this, think about Google Maps, for example. Like there's many applications out there that make use of the Google Maps API, right? But none of them actually like care, the programming, like about the programming languages that we used to create Google Maps, or where Google Maps is hosted, or anything like that, right? The only thing you care about is the fact that there's an API and there are instructions on how you connect to the API and how you request services from the API. And all you have to do literally is just send those requests, and then you get like the functionality that you need from the API, right? So you learn more about web services next year, though, so don't worry yourself too much about them. Do any applications still use SOAP, or have most just moved to RESTful APIs? So there are like other applications that still use SOAP, but I mean, like REST is more prevalent these days. Um, Yes, JSON is much less of a headache than XML. That is very true. And truly speaking, like most like developers and like tech stacks and all of that stuff all of that is moving towards JSON objects instead of XML because it's easier to process, it's easier to read, and so forth. So yeah, that is very true. Okay, so I think we have one more question. So from the question paper, how's managing DLLs as a resource in your program similar to managing memory or data files? This is very, very easy, right? Remember, managing memory, if you think about pointers, right? You have to allocate memory, you have to use that memory, and then you have to deallocate memory, right? So it's acquire, use, release, right? Yeah, or resource allocation is initialization, right? So, but the main idea is that you acquire a resource, you use the resource, and you release the resource, right? So with DLLs, it's the same thing, right? You acquire the resource, so it's just you acquire the resource, you use the resource, you release the resource, right? And then with files, it's the same thing, right? You open a file, acquire the resource, you use the file, and then you close the file, you release the resource. So that's what this question is asking about. As you can see, it's 3 marks. So you need to mention all of those 3 different things, and then you get your marks. All right. So I'm sure you guys can see that the more you practice this, the easier it will be, hopefully. Um, I can tell you now, like I've seen it countless times. Like students can get 100% for these tests, right? And I'm not saying that like if you don't get 100%, I don't know, like it's a bad thing. Obviously, your main goal is to pass. But what I'm trying to say is that that is how much doable they are, right? You just need to practice as much as you can, right? Start a paper, just and don't stop until you finish it, right? If you struggle with a question, try the question. If you're still struggling, ask, right? And then after you get guidance on how to answer the question, move on to the next question. The more time you spend on this, the more you will be excellent at it, right? There's no other way, unfortunately. That's how the world works. That's how this works. And that is just how reality is. So with that being said, I wish you guys all the best for your exam. I think you guys did well by making it this far. You should really consider that like a big achievement, considering the fact that we had to have online classes and all of that stuff under the circumstances. If you made it this far, I'm really, really proud of you, and I think that like you have the capacity to make it through the exam and through your degree and through your honors and through your masters and through your PhD. All right, but good luck for your exams, and I wish you guys all the best. And don't forget, you can always ask questions on Discord and email and so forth. All right, so without taking more of your time, let me stop recording.